So now that our tripod is all set up and stable, we can put the telescope onto it. When we're putting the telescope on it, the telescope has a little indent in the base, which this pin will fit into to make sure it's centered on the base. And then we're going to be using these locking bolts to lock the telescope onto the tripod. So the telescope is in our case, and it's usually a two-person job to lift the telescope out, so we have a few people doing this job. When we first open the case, we see the dew shield. We like to keep the dew shield in the case just because we know where it is, and we can just put that off to the side. So there's a handle on one arm of the telescope where one person can lift up, and then there's a little handle on the other side on the bottom of the opposite arm where a second person can hold on to. And then a third person is helpful for this job to help guide the base of the telescope onto that pin. So once it's on the pin, you can twist the telescope until you feel it lock. And that's when those pins are in the right, those bolts are in the right place. And you can push up on the bolts and twist them to lock them in. This knob on the side of the arm adjusts the altitude of the telescope. So you can loosen that to adjust the telescope and then retighten it and make sure that's not too tight, but tight enough that the telescope doesn't move. And then this is the other adjustment knob on the base of the telescope. Allows you to twist the telescope around. And again, you want to make sure that that is tight enough so the telescope doesn't move. So now that the telescope is on its base, it's going to be stable for the rest of the night, and we're ready to power it up. So now that it's all set up on the tripod, we can connect the power to the telescope. And this is our power supply. Ours is yellow. Some teams have a red power supply. We're going to take the splitter, which will go into the power supply port. And we use a splitter because usually we're using the camera system with the telescope, and one of these would provide power to the camera system. So we're only going to use one right now. And this cord over here is the telescope's power cord. So one side goes into the power supply, that's like the cigarette lighter, and then we can plug that into the telescope. And then we want to get the hand control and its holder. There's this little. So the holder goes into the side opposite the handle, and that's just a holder for the hand paddle. And it has a little jack right there to plug it into. So now we have power to the telescope. You'll have a cover on here that you'll want to take off. And the first thing we'll want to put on is the visual back. And that'll go where the cover was on your scope. And you just twist that on. The next thing to go in is the star diagonal, which is this 90-degree accessory that goes in there. And we put this on so that if we put the camera or the eyepiece in, it's not coming straight out of the telescope, because then if the telescope turned, it could hit it, and it's difficult to look through. So we put this diagonal on so that we're looking in this way instead. So now that this is on, we can put an eyepiece in or a camera if we're going to be recording an event. So you take the dust covers off of the eyepiece and then slide it into here. And sometimes you have to loosen these knobs, and then you lock it into place by lightly tightening those. So before you observe, you want to take the lens cap off and set that to the side. And we usually want to use the dew shield just to make sure we're protecting from any dew getting into the telescope. So it has a Velcro around here. So we want to line that up and tighten it. Sometimes it takes a few adjustments. And then you can turn on your telescope and you're ready to start observing.